What's good, everybody? This is Jeremiah Knight here, and you're tuning in to Therapy House, the podcast. It's been a minute since we've dropped another episode, and hey, the backlog is killing me with editing and everything else. So I've been juggling a few things, so hopefully you guys will cut me some slack. But yet, I'm back with another great episode on grief and loss with Tong. Here we're able to talk about John's loss, as well as how it's helped to make sense of grief and its work through therapy. And so, on this release date of Dia de los Muertos, we bring you something special as we take our time to remember the ones that have passed away. We hope that you join us and pay your homage, your honor to those that you have lost on your own journey, through growth, through success, through love, and everything in between. So, stay tuned. What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Jeremiah Knight here again, this time with John Tong.
What's up, everybody?
We are sitting cozily in his living room. Nice, warm lighting, plants everywhere. Shoes off because that is the policy at the house now.
I feel like we've lived in different houses with a no shoe policy, but we kind of brought it back now for different reasons. Before it was to preserve the white carpet, chill house, and now it's more rule of my lady.
Yep. She's top dog, so I mean, hey. And we want to make sure we can continue to have a podcast rather than her coming in and break our mics, because new rules.
That's right. That's right. Keep your partner happy.
Exactly. Here again with another short episode, and this time the topic is grief and loss. John is no stranger to it, and, well, who else better to speak with it other than my existential partner in crime?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think first and foremost, I'm just thankful that you really asked me to do this episode and just really asking me really about my experience of grief, because it's really a topic that people often shy away from. Like, even when you know somebody has been grieving or has gone through grief in the past, I feel like just in the mainstream public, it's just a topic that either people feel like you have a timeline that kind of you go through it and then you're done with it, or why don't you feel back to quote unquote normal anymore? And then for the person who's actually grieving, there isn't necessarily an end, but just because of the way that the mainstream public sort of shies away from it, it almost inherently kind of comes to an end when people stop asking about it.
Right.
So that's why I'm just thankful that you even brought it up.
Yeah. And we don't get into that. So listen, before we go there, how are you defining grief and loss? Because it's clearly much more than just sadness and being sad or having a bad day or just depression. But it feels like it's that, but with a special twist. And so how are you defining that twist?
I feel like we can get really scientific into like what the definition of grief is, but I think the best way that I can really describe it for the layperson out there is just that you had someone in your life that made a really big impact, and now like that person is physically gone. That person is physically gone, but it's not just their lack of physical presence, but it's almost like you've lost a part of your self or your story. It's like, you know that that person was once there, and there's just like this huge chunk of you that is now missing. So it's almost like that person's impact on you is still being felt, even though they're like physically gone.
So as you kind of talk about that definition, you even sound like it's some of your own personal definition or kind of what you've told clients and share with others. who comes up in your mind when we talk about grief?
I think the most immediate experience of grief that I've experienced was losing my godfather. His name was Mike Duarte, aka Mickey, and I used to call him Nino because I couldn't pronounce padrino when I was a kid, which means godfather in Spanish. And so my nickname for him, like a lot of other Latino children, is usually Nino or Nina for your godparents. And so for him, growing up, he was always my Nino. And, even as I got older, obviously I could say the word padrino, but it just still came naturally to call him Nino. That was just like the childhood nickname that I gave him, and it just stuck. And pretty much even other people ended up knowing him as Nino in my life. And so I moved in with him when I was about 4 years old with my mom. We were going through a different move. We had gone to live with my aunt for a while in Fremont, which I like vaguely remember at this point, more probably from like photographs and stuff that kind of jogs the memory. And then moved into this house that was my mom's, but she was going to lose it. And so my godfather, Nino, ended up taking it over, and being so close as a family member, being named my godfather, he knew that we were going through a rough time. And so he actually allowed us to stay there. And that just started an entire journey throughout my whole upbringing where he really was my rock. Like I said, I moved in with him when I was 4, and he was a father figure to me my whole life. And he passed away when I was, I believe, roughly around 24. So I spent the better of 20 years living with him every day. I mean, even when I graduated high school, I still stayed with him, and I stayed living at home and was a commuter student in college, and then in my graduate program as well. So home was where he was, and he just raised me. We also have this Spanish term in Peru called chochera, which is sort of like almost like a mini sidekick. And sometimes you see that when like a little kid attaches themselves to like kind of like a grandparent or something like that. And it's pretty cute. And like, they're like almost always hanging around that person. Right. And so sometimes you say, oh, él es tu chochera, right? Like, it's almost like, oh, he's your mini sidekick. And so I felt like super bonded with him, and that I was like his sidekick. And as obviously I started growing older, going from a little kid at, 4 years old to, more of a teenager and then a young adult, he was there for me throughout different chapters of my life. And I would also say that because of his health conditions, which ended up worsening in the latter few years of his life, the roles sort of reversed. He was once taking care of me, and it ended up being me taking care of him in the later chapters. But one way or another, we were always bonded, and there were just a lot of memories growing up, just from whether it was interest in cars, lessons that he showed me on how to be a gentleman, and cultural stuff, like some of the Chicano culture that he was a part of, some of the lowrider culture, and just really being my confidant and being able to tell him anything and everything, from relationships to friendships to life values.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, I think sometimes even in my family, they don't understand why I'm very go with the flow, and that was part of his nature. And I think while everybody else was sort of frantic or scrambling around me in different relationships that I saw growing up, like I said, he was always pretty calm and collected, and was just a cool guy. And so I think some of that rubbed off on me. And it's just this whole totality of a person that was in my life and during very pivotal years, and eventually ended up shaping who I became. Like I said before, as his health turned for the worst, he ended up getting brain cancer. We didn't know it was that at the time. It just manifested itself as seizures in his last 4 years. And they had found these white spots on his brain. They thought that it might have been some traumatic brain injury at some point in his life. And we had kind of gone through different scenarios in which he might have gotten that TBI, but too late in the end, we ended up finding out that it was a really aggressive cancer that had, in some weird way, started to grow, then was completely stagnant for close to about 4 years, other than the seizures that were recurring. And then at the very, very end, after doing the biopsy, the neurologists and neurosurgeons had recommended to try to get to the bottom of it. It almost felt like that just triggered it even more. And at that point, then it began to spread. And he didn't last much longer after that. One of the seizures basically took him out of our care at home because it was becoming a lot. And so we had to transition him into short-term hospice at a facility. And then after that, he had about a couple more. And then on that last one, he actually swallowed some type of liquid or water or something. And then somehow that got into his lungs during that last seizure. And the doctors at the time gave me the most horrific decision that I had to make because I was his primary healthcare agent. And so they asked me basically, like, do I want to save him from pneumonia, which would undoubtedly take him out, in a matter of days, or would I want to save him from that and go through with the cancer? And so he and I had already had a lot of talks, going way back from even classes in college that I took for death, dying, and loss, and then more personal talks with like doing an advance directive, naming me as the person who would make that decision should there ever come a time. And even when he was in hospice, it broke my heart seeing him there and, knowing that, just wanting to go home, but not being able to, also telling me that he's just done, like he's just given up the fight. And I remember at that time being faced with that question. I ended up telling the doctors not to save him from the pneumonia, in essence, pulling the plug and allowing him to die of those natural causes, as opposed to letting him die from the full-on cancer and everything that would undoubtedly bring. And that was something that I know that it affected a lot of people in his family as well as in my own, but I really felt like it was just about respecting his wishes at the end. And that was what he wanted. And we had it in writing. We had talked about it many times. And that time was coming nearer and nearer every time. And towards the end, I just had to put that on my shoulders because that's what he asked me to do. And I did it. And I don't regret it. It still kind of haunts me to this day in terms of being really the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But so it's not just about losing him, but it's about all those things leading up to that, from growing up with him, living with him, then turning the tables and taking care of him, then being ultimately the one to have to pull the plug at the end. But it's just a whole series of 20 years worth of learning about this thing we call life together.
Right.
And then to see him actually pass away, was definitely a very hard lesson. And that's what taught me about grief.
Yeah, because they talk about grief being, in a sense, just life happening to you. And as you journey on, knowing that you will have loss, or whether it's people or things or pieces of yourself along the way, and just having to go through the transition with this missing piece and knowing it's there. In this journey, it sounds like you've had to make a lot of decisions in that, kind of had to wrestle with yourself emotionally, having a piece or this person who has left such an impression on you, in part has had like a big hand in your essence and who you are and how you move through this world, and it has impacted or influenced how you find meaning in things in life and relationships. Then to come to a point where you have to kind of make this major decision while also dealing with the piece of, I have to let go of this person, but then also have to be responsible and make decisions as you kind of move forward to the inevitable end of their life and, who you will inevitably become without them. At least in that piece, after the diagnosis of his brain cancer, how do you feel like that impacted you?
Well, I think it set off another chapter, and I think that even when he was dealing with the seizures for roughly about the last 4 years of his life, I mean, we had literally had thought, oh, this is probably just a traumatic brain injury that had happened at some point in his life.
Mm-hmm.
I remember he talked about how he had, when he was very young, back in like the 50s and all that, like in 60s, he had been flung out of a car, when he was joyriding one time. Another time he'd gotten into a fight and had been knocked out cold. And so there had been these sort of moments that he did lose consciousness, something like a concussion that now we kind of talk more about because of football and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was just, oh, you just got knocked out and that was it. You move forward. And so the neurosurgeon and the neurologist could not understand why the white spots weren't growing, because if it was cancer, even for the slowest growing cancer, there would still be growth and movement in those frequent MRI scans. And so for roughly about 3.5 out of those 4 years, there was no movement at all. And so that's where they started changing the narrative, saying, well, if it's not cancer, then, it's probably a traumatic brain injury. It's some type of scar that for some weird reason is just now affecting the electrical synapses and stuff like that and causing these like seizures, right? These kind of like short circuits in the brain. And we fed into that idea because it's the only thing that really made sense at the time.
Right.
And we were trying to rationalize it while also dealing with the fact of like, well, thank God it's not cancer,
Yeah. The relief it brought to be something else.
Right. And that also had its own chapter. Like, I remember for a long time, he used to be the most social guy. He would be the type of person who could talk to a homeless guy for like hours on end at a bus stop, just randomly. He would also give the shirt off his back to help somebody in need without even questioning. And after the seizures really impacted his life, he couldn't drive, which also took away part of his, being in the lowrider culture. He owned a Cadillac Eldorado till the day he died, yet he couldn't drive it. So then I was the one who had to drive him in it. And just a lot of different pieces about his identity were just being chipped away. And even to the point where he didn't even feel like himself anymore, not being able to eat certain things, not being able to drink certain things, not being able to do certain things. I mean, he got so bad with social anxiety at one point towards the end because of this fear that he was going to have a seizure in public, that he just really started to isolate. And so way, way, way down the line, after about 3.5 years of seeing him sort of erode like that, little by little, then to finally get the biopsy, because then the neurologists are like, well, we should at least try to see what's going on.
Right.
And then to have them open him up, take a little piece out, analyze it, and then to get the verdict like, oh yeah, sorry, our bad. It actually was cancer the whole fucking time. And we're just like, what the hell? And then I think at that point, it was really hard, because shortly after that, his level of care got worse and he just couldn't stay home as much anymore. And that's when we had to eventually transition him to a hospital stay. And then the hospital stay led us to the SNF list and skilled nursing facility and short-term hospice. And those last 2 or 3 months were definitely a whirlwind of just trying to figure out like what next,
Yeah.
But it was just a very marked different chapter, almost preparing for death in a way. And then even then, not knowing exactly when he would pass, other than just trying to understand that he would probably have more seizures more frequently. And then
question the quality of life. And
exactly. And it's just heartbreaking. Like I said, like, for just even knowing my history and like him having taken us in when we didn't have a place to go. And then later on, you know, taking care of him, just, and then even for myself, like then kind of coming to that acceptance of like, I can't take care of him. I needed help. You know, at one point we had asked one of my really good friends, Tony, and a couple of Nino's family members to be rotating with us, because even part of Latino culture, like we couldn't just leave him in the facility by himself. Like we had to take shifts and like just go and visit him and be with him for hours. You know, at one point it was like my mom for like a few hours, then I would go and relieve her for another few hours, then Tony would go for another few hours, then you know a cousin of mine from his side of the family would go for another few hours, and then we would just repeat that every day, because we just didn't really want him to feel alone. I just wanted him to be there, you know, and still having semblances of his personality. Like I remember after like about 40 years, he had gotten to witness the Warriors championship with Steph and Clay and Draymond and all those guys in 2014. And he was just ecstatic, because it was like all these years of like the Warriors sucking and not being anything, and then finally being like, yo, we're revolutionizing basketball. And he himself was a champion in 79 for the Mexican American Basketball Association. I still got his trophy in the garage. And I remember in 2015, right, like they broke the record, and we were in hospice watching it on this little small TV. And he was just like, God, you know, Steph is so good. And, you know, and all these guys are just so damn good. And they're going to take down LeBron. And we didn't actually win that year, right? We broke the record for most wins in a season, but then we ultimately lost to LeBron. And, yeah, he didn't get to see that part. So I was like, nah, he got out just in time.
Just that.
He didn't get to see that terrible ending, the deficit from 3-1, but
you know, but not all bad things are bad things. We would have never got KD unless we lost. So
yeah, but I think there's an element of grief that is remembering that person's identity and how that identity impacted your own identity.
yeah,
In this case, my identity. Right? All these memories, whether it's driving the cars, you know, sharing basketball, sharing all these different things, and then the totality of this person's presence just no longer being in your life. Because I feel like I can tell you everything that we did together, and then there's a certain part in my timeline where his part just stops immediately, right? And like I'm just continuing to walk forward, but that person just completely stopped in that point. And so they're no longer walking side by side.
yeah,
And I think that that's another visual to kind of think about grief, right? And so how do you continue to move forward when this other person has stopped and there's no more going forward?
right.
For them.
And then how do you transition of that? Because then there is this loss. This is this impactful person, experience, opportunity that you have to proceed on, no matter how impactful it is, how far you've come with it. Your journey still continues, and it stops. And then you're forced to sit there and make sense of the world without this piece, which is mind-blowing. I think the training that I attended, really shine a light on. We sometimes regress back to a place where we feel the most comfortable. Well, normally when we lose things or when we're sad, we normally do this thing. For me, with the clients that I've worked with, I feel like when we reach those emotional pits, that we regress to this like immature being. I usually imagine I fall back into me being a teenager, or where these kind of vulnerable pieces are, and just trying to adapt and do things how I used to do. But that Jeremiah did not handle grief, did not handle sadness well at all. And after being frustrated and struggling, I need to handle this missing piece differently. I'm proceeding on into this unknown without this key piece that's an important part of my life for so long, and now I have to create meaning without it. What is life without this person?
Well, I think that for people who are grieving, they grieve in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think for my personal journey through grief, like one of the things that I did that brought me a lot of comfort was I couldn't leave the house unless I was wearing one of his rings. Part of being in the lowrider culture was always being about style and being spick and spam, jet black hair, iron shirt, button up, khakis with the crease in them, like boots polished. Like you couldn't go
Right.
out without being in style. And so he had a ring collection, and for I want to say close to about 3 years, I never left the house without wearing one of his rings, and that was just part of like a transitional object, I guess you could say, right? Like something that I could physically wear that was his, and I would just literally carry it with me every day. So I think there's like little things like that people have that you remember, but in terms of maybe like you're talking about like more behaviors or like kind of ways of being, I definitely know that it was such a meaningful relationship in my life that just undoubtedly impacted me. I would say one of my biggest mistakes in my grieving process was then immediately going into grief and then putting a lot of that pressure on a former partner that I had. And I couldn't see it at the time. In the best way that I saw it in the early therapy that I went to after the breakup was learning that, I had given up or not given up, I had lost my past. Even getting a little choked up here.
Yep.
I had lost my past, and then I had this illusion that I was somehow going to make this relationship that I had at the time work, and I was going to put a lot of pressure into it just to make it work, because I couldn't end up losing the future too, and guess what? I did end up losing it, and a lot of that was my fault too. We live and learn, but I think there's nothing that could have ever replaced my relationship with Nino. And that's one mistake that I saw, and I had to go to therapy to grow from that. I think even relationships in other areas too were impacted for a long time. Like in recent years, for example, I've been able to reconcile with my father, and we've been able to grow in our own relationship in a way that I never really thought was possible. And it's not to say that Nino had gotten in the way. No, far from that. I mean, I remember even early on, he had told me, never call me father, because I am your godfather. You have a father, and he deserves to have his own relationship with you. He was always very respectful of that. And being a little kid, I didn't really understand that until I got older.
Right.
But I think in the immediate aftermath, going into my grief, I was very upset that my father had not even asked me how I was doing for a long time. I think it was close to almost like a year of just even where it was just like he knew this, I had lost this person, and it never even just like crossed his mind to ask, or maybe he did or didn't want to or felt ashamed. I don't know. Or it was but it was just a subject that was avoided. And I think that I held a lot of resentment in that, like, why can't you just ask me, like, how am I doing? And not even necessarily that I wanted to really go into it, but just like, I think for me, there was that also pressure of trying to compare, and not in a healthy way of like, Nino would never allow me to go through something so impactful and not even ask how I'm doing. And I think I was holding that and other resentment that I had in the relationship with my dad for a long time. I really had to go back into therapy and really figure out, like, what the hell am I doing in all these different relationships?
Right.
Like, it wasn't just that romantic relationship. It was also like my relationship with my father that I still had, and then had to eventually down the road develop and put more of an effort and my own part into. And then just other relationships too. I remember my mom, for example, she and I were like really splitting a lot of duties of taking care of him.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't me, it was her. And if it wasn't her, it was me for like those last few years. But like Nino and her hadn't gotten along for a long time. And then when he got really sick, you know, my mom kind of changed her tune and was able to really like be there for him, even on an emotional level, which had been absent for a long time. And I remember that there was a time when she and I couldn't go a day without referencing something about Nino. And obviously we've moved forward and we're in a different chapter too, but there was just a time when it was just so enmeshed in almost every day, like I'm saying, like having to figure out, like, is it you, is it me, like, is it, you know, are you okay, am I okay, like what's going on? And just checking in on each other like to the nth degree, and then having to have that taken away, and then kind of figuring out like, wait, like we're not caregivers, like we're like what, like we're in this whole new chapter, like how are we supposed to relate again?
Yeah, what do we do?
Yeah, like what does today look like? Like it's a whole different chapter.
Yeah.
So it just impacts you in so many different ways.
True.
That, you know, it really it really challenges you in this way where you asked earlier about finding meaning or creating meaning from this grief experience. And just because I've always been aligned with the existential way of thinking, and then later on in my career now existential psychotherapy, yes, you can find meaning, but I definitely try to be as active as possible and try to create meaning. And I think one of the things that upset me when I was going through grief was people trying to figure out where I was in the stages of grief. You know, we go back to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and all those, like if you see Adult Swim and Robot Chicken, you got the little giraffe with the 5 stages, you know, denial, bargaining, acceptance.
The issue with that though is those are anticipatory grief, not the actual stages of grief, which you have a brilliant video that we recorded that it's unreleased about Warden's stages, which is a little bit more accurate.
Yeah. And I much prefer Warden because it's more about 4 tasks that you have, right? And I think they're all important, don't get me wrong, but the one task, I think it's number 3, which is the one that I think really is most identifiable in my own experience of grief, is the one where you're adjusting to a world without.
Right.
And it's not just you that's changed. It's the entire world around you is now different just because this one person is now missing.
Right.
Like it's changed everything. It's, you know, you don't look at relationships the same way. You don't look at yourself the same way. Like you wake up in the morning and it feels different now. There's like an emptiness. I remember you and the other homies, you know, were able to help me celebrate my birthday for the first time. I remember, I think that was 5 or 6 years after Nino had passed. One of the things that I found special, for example, that I think coincided with you asking me about grief, was that Nino's birthday and my birthday were 3 days apart. I'm April 8th and he was April 11th. And so growing up, you know, we used to celebrate our birthdays together. It would be like our birthday week and our birthday month, and we would just be finding new excuses to celebrate together. And so when he passed, I found my birthday coming up, and there's no way in hell it could ever feel the same. And this person I had spent 20 years celebrating my birthday with was now no longer here. And I would genuinely feel just beyond sad on my birthdays. And I would just feel like this huge reminder of something that could never be again. And then it was the same also for holidays. Like, you know, he passed away on December 30th. And so going into 2016, that was a horrible New Year's. And even for years afterwards, I think that it really tainted how I spent New Year's because I just didn't feel like doing anything. Instead of everybody around me celebrating, like, yay, the new year, like, what's your resolutions? And what are you excited for in this upcoming year? And how do you close off this year? It was just like this painstaking reminder of like, oh, how do I close this off? Oh, I close it off by reminding myself of the person I probably loved the most, in this world at the time, and forever saying goodbye. That's how I remembered New Year's for a while, until my current partner, Stephanie, God bless her heart, she also helped me start a new tradition of being able to go out and us just having our own little kind of getaway trip where we didn't have the kids and we didn't have anybody else involved, and we would just literally go off, just the two of us, around New Year's. And it wouldn't have to be on New Year's, but it would just be around it.
Yeah.
And we started that tradition together. And so, yes, there was this immediate aftermath of grief, but then at another yet later chapter, then you start a new tradition. And so these chapters continue to progress. And I feel like I've tried to do different things in my life to either put a stamp on the previous chapters or to put a mark on new chapters opening with the people that I love around me. But yeah, there'll never be something that fills that grief, but you just learn to live in a world without that person. Or in another way, some people have said, like, you don't ever end your grief, but you just learn to live with your grief.
It's forever enduring. It's always there. I think there's also a piece where I've been able to talk to a lot more people about not all bad things are bad things. Some of these pieces or some of these losses, you may have needed to become a little bit more who you wanted to become, or who you thought you needed to be, or who you always envisioned yourself to be. And what may come after that may be something that's much more special, much more rich, much more in depth, and being open to that instead of trying to hang on to the piece of, no, everything needs to be the way it was. The impact needs to be just as minimal. Like, no, this is a whole transition. Several pieces may have to change or may be enlightened. Highlighted that this needs to be different. No, this relationship isn't fulfilling enough. I need it more now. Or this opportunity, how I'm living, it needs to shift because everything is put in perspective now.
I mean, undoubtedly, bad shit has happened in my life, just like in everybody else's life. But I guess I'm pretty privileged to say that for a long period of my life before entering in grief, I really felt like I was determining my life path. I was making certain decisions to go certain places, to do certain things, and things had a way of figuring themselves out. I'm also very type B, so very go with the flow. Like it'll work at itself out eventually, like as long as I stay on my path. Well, one of the things that both cemented more of that mentality, yet also challenged that mentality to its core and made me recommit kind of to that own personality shift, is losing Nino. Because it was like I had at that time already a certificate in gerontology. I had psychology. I had been a caregiver. I had worked in an adult daycare. I was in a graduate program about to enter practicum year, so pretty much done with most of the classes. And yet this huge thing happened to me and I felt totally unprepared. Like nothing could have prepared me for this. No matter how many things you read in a book about grief and things like that, it doesn't hit until you actually go through it. You can have all the theoretical knowledge, but even as some engineers say, like it's not just about theory, it's also about practice. And in the real world is very different than the lab simulated world. And so for me, I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned from grief was that I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to do these things to try to influence my life in a certain direction. But now I also know, because of the resiliency that it's built up, that even when things don't work out the way I plan, or even in this case, the worst case scenario happens, it's still going to end up being relatively okay in the end. And I will find new meaning. I will find a new chapter, and there will be new missions and adventures to go on. And I'm not saying that because of like, I'm a happy-go-lucky, hopeful cat. Like, no, it's not about like, yay, adventures. It's more about like, my story is just not done. Even though this horrible thing happened, and yes, it was the end of Nino, that doesn't end Nino's significance in my life. That doesn't end how he impacted me and the chain reaction of how I want to be a dad or a stepfather as I am now. It doesn't end some of the values that I hold dear. It doesn't end my story and my career. Yeah, certain things changed. I actually didn't go into gerontology like I had originally planned. I didn't actually work with the elderly as much as I had hoped for. Certain things changed. You know, I also realized after having volunteered at an adult daycare with people with dementia and then having been a caregiver for my godfather, I realized I don't want to be a caregiver, you know, professionally at least. You know, I that's not what I want, and that's not what I studied for, despite having that knowledge base. So yeah, there's things that definitely changed about my life that I would not have been able to foresee at the time. But that doesn't mean that I just completely give up on everything. I still became a therapist. And in fact, I think having gone through grief has allowed me now to help others go through some of their life changes. And sometimes I feel like clients are like in front of me and they're just like so worried and anxious about like, well, what if I do this? Or what if I do this other side? And so they're like at these forks in the road. And I think in my existential being, like, I obviously try to point out the pros and cons, cost benefit analysis, right? I run through the whole gamut of existential thought process with them. But I know on the other side that whichever path they take, their story will also not be over. Their story will also continue with or without me. So there's just so many different life lessons that I think one learns through grief, but it's quite a process. Year 1 doesn't feel the same as year 2, year 3, I think at this point I think I'm close to like year 8 or something like that. Year 8 or year 9. I mean, it's getting up there, but its impact is still something I feel almost every day.
Just the practice of surrendering and trusting that you'll find a way and you'll figure it out. You have to struggle a little bit to get there, but
I feel like before, when I was maybe in the early stages of trying existential, I think I tried to fall back on also helping people really make those decisions to steer their life in the direction that they wanted to go. But I just don't see it as an absolute anymore. You know, I think grief taught me that yes, you can make certain decisions and you can try going in a direction, but it's only going to generally go in that direction. It's not 100% determined by that choice. There's too many factors that are unaccounted for, and your decision is one of those factors. It could be a big factor, but it's just one of the factors. I think it gave me more of that life perspective.
All right, so let's get into the nitty gritty. Why, John?
Okay. The why.
Called this episode mainly because I feel like there's some personal stuff in it. I think for the most part, from the ICANN's training I went to about grief and loss, just highlighted how we kind of have these like difficulties talking about grief with clients. For me, I also was able to interpret that as even just talking to friends and family about grief, quite often always myself and others kind of falling into the trap of we're talking about something that's uncomfortable, unsettling, falling into this place of easily just trying to either manage my own kind of discomfort with talking about it and other people's pain outside of therapy, or even just kind of like, hey, this is someone I care about. So it's going to solve itself out, or, giving up or easily kind of sliding into advice without knowing. Some of this stuff is like subconscious. Some of it is unconscious. It's just like, oh, I need to perk them up. When in reality, a lot of the times in therapy, outside of therapy, in relationships, it's not about trying to pep them up. It's not about trying to lessen the blow or make their grief, a little smaller. It's about just sitting there and talking about it. Just even being able to ask you, what does it feel like? Or how heavy is it today? Because you did mention it earlier, this is a continuing thing. You're continuing on life, and this grief or the weight of the loss pops up. It may not be so heavy or the same intensity all the time, but at different points, transitions through your life, having kids, getting into a relationship, getting a job, these different pieces, this grief kind of pops up there in different aspects. And so I think in some parts, the training kind of reminded me of like, hey, are you comfortable in those conversations? Are you, or have you been showing up to your friends or for your friends in that way? Or have you been checking in on them? Because there are a lot of times where, this grief is something they are carrying on, a subject that they always have something to add to it, but yet nobody is asking. And so a part of me has talked to a few people about it, but even with you, I mean, we've been together since I dropped off my application at Santa Clara. So this is like spring of 2014. And so you were like, oh yeah, you just go drop it off at this office over here. Went through all grad school. We didn't do practicum together, but you ended up at Starlight, and we spent all this time. I feel like I knew about Nino, or you have a big poster of him in the garage. So, I mean, you can't miss him, especially when we lived together. But at all that time, I think I didn't really ask how you were doing periodically. I think there's, in my perspective, just being like, hey, it seems like he's doing good. If I bring it up, it'll be too heavy for him, or it'll bring back negative memories, or I'll open up a new wound, or I don't know if he's even really thinking about it. It seems like he's fine. Or just like, you know what, if he wants to talk, he'll bring it up. Or he already has somebody to talk to. He has family, he has Luis, he has other people. But if he needs to talk to it, I'll be here. And so I feel like that's everybody. Everybody kind of has that misconception, and then you go on with this. I wish someone would ask me about him, or at least I wonder if you kind of went through these times where you kind of worried about or wish someone would just ask me.
I think that one of the weirdest things about grief is that everybody respects it, but everybody's also low-key kind of afraid of it. Like, one of the things I think a lot of people about grief will tell you is that as soon as you start mentioning this person that you lost, there's sort of a respectful silence, that at first feels comforting because it's like, oh, like they're being respectful and all that. But then the silence lasts too long. And then it goes into like, maybe I shouldn't talk about it because now I'm making the other person feel uncomfortable, And then there's just a lot of those different avoidances that you're talking about, right? Like, oh, maybe, he's good now, or he's got somebody else to talk about it, or, oh, I shouldn't bring it up because I'm going to bring him down. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of grief, because by the very definition of the fact that it's something that you carry with you for the rest of your life, yes, there's going to be people that are still learning how to carry it, but you can really ask about it any time, whether it weighs a pound or it weighs the whole world on your shoulders. It still feels nice to be asked about it, and I think that that's the sad part about grief, is that after a certain period of time, people stop asking. and they just assume like, oh, it's been a year, like, or maybe they'll stay up to the year like, oh, it's barely the first year. It's the first Christmas. It's the first New Year's. It's the first birthday, whatever it is for the holidays, right? And people sort of like remember that and they're like, oh, and then they kind of fall silent. And then there's never any follow up after that. But I think that what people going through grief would really like is trying to find ways to bring this person still back into something of your daily experience, right? So, for example, could be a grandchild asking a grandma, like, what was grandpa like? Or where did grandpa like to take you to eat? Or, what was something that grandpa used to do to make you special? That doesn't all of a sudden make the grandmother sad necessarily, maybe some, but it can be a joyful memory of like, nobody's asked me that in a long time. Let me tell you. And there's almost sort of like a cheerfulness to it. But I think people get really scared because they don't know when that part comes. They just, stay in this like, should I ask, should I not ask for a long time? And then there's also just the idea too that like maybe you're not being asked because maybe you're the only one that really still feels it. For example, you're even sharing with me right now, right? Like, should I have asked? Should I not? Like, you saw the picture, you know who Nino was, and or have heard of him, understand that he was a big impact, but we didn't talk about it much. And so I think that there's a part of like, it's never a bad thing to ask, hey, tell me something about them. Or, hey, I'm noticing this picture, or hey, I'm noticing this. Like, can you tell me like just something about it? It doesn't even have to be like, how are you feeling about the grief? It could just be, hey, tell me about Nino. Or, hey, what's your favorite memory of Nino? Or, what did he like to listen to? Right? Just something that gives the person in grief something to kind of channel, I feel like that's something that a lot of people feel hesitant about because they also think that being asked about grief has to be about the dying process. And it doesn't always have to be about the actual physical death. It could be about the memory. It could be about the love. It could be about the impact, the meaning behind this person. And that is just as meaningful as asking somebody like, how heavy is it today? Obviously, grief comes in waves, and there are some days that are harder than others. And the hope is with time, because you start to manage it better, as well as the passage of time allows for different doors opening, right? The waves will become less of a tsunami and more of little ripples that you still feel. But all in all, it's always welcome to talk about someone that you loved, just as if you would like to be asked about somebody that you currently are in love with, right? Or have a special relationship with. It's also perfectly fine to ask somebody about somebody that they loved and arguably they still love, just that person isn't physically around anymore.
Or even just experiences, whether it's even just losing a job or an opportunity or breakup or kind of these little instances, even with diagnoses, whether it's lupus or diabetes, because that could be something we just like, oh, yeah, they're fine. They're taking their medication. They're keeping up with their doctor. We don't need to talk about how their life is continually changing. It's like, no, yeah, talk about it. I think I get caught up in the piece of how do I kind of bring it up in a way that's not stereotypical or weird. And no, you can just rip out the Band-Aid and ask. Again, like I still believe it's a topic that you're always going to have something added to or have something to say about it. And if today you want to say a little bit or today you want to say a lot, you can easily just say, hey, Jeremiah, I don't want to talk about that today. And that's fine enough. Well, do you feel like the attempt is enough for you?
No, absolutely, man. I mean, I think that a large part of Warden's task model and that fourth piece talks about kind of a transformative experience, right? Sort of like, how do you keep this person alive metaphorically? And I think that comes with being able to talk about this person, and it comes with being able to share experiences like that. And like I said, it just shapes so much of who you are that not talking about it would not give you the full picture of who this person was, right? In my own life now, today I was tasked with cooking dinner. And in a way, we were kind of preparing a little rice bowl, and the kids loved it, and my partner loved it, and everything. And in my head, as I was just chopping up stuff by myself in the kitchen, the little one came up to me and asked, "Hey, John, can I help you out?" And this time I told him, "No, you got to do your homework and all that." But other times I've allowed him to. And that reminds me of times when I would be like the sous chef for Nino, and I'd be chopping up stuff, washing stuff on the side, and he'd be more of the master in the kitchen, and I'd be like the little assistant. And here I was in this time. It didn't end up being that way, but a lot of other times I do allow him to come in. I've showed him how to chop stuff. I've showed him how to clean certain things, how to try to maintain the kitchen orderly. And so that's just a natural passing of the torch. And I don't know, he's 10. I don't know that he fully understands that passing of the torch, but it's meaningful to me. Same thing, I think on April 11th, I woke up that morning on his birthday, and I had such a bad stomach ache. Like, and I felt almost like anxious and jittery. And I was like, what the hell? This doesn't feel like me at all. Like, this is just weird. And it was just very odd. I remember just taking a pause, and I was like, of course I would feel weird on this day. This is Nino's birthday. Like, even if I didn't have a stomach ache, like I would feel something. And literally cried my eyes out on the way dropping off the kids to school. There was a moment where we do this little music roulette thing in the car. And so it came up to my turn. And so I asked for them to play something by Bob Dylan called Mr. Tambourine Man.
Oh, and that's going to get him.
That was a song that Nino and I used to share all the time. He was just a Bob Dylan fanatic, but we knew all the words to it, and we'd be like driving around in one of his cars, and we would be singing along to that song. And so I was singing some of the words, and I had to stop singing some because I was just too choked up, and I was trying to keep singing. And I don't know if the boys really understood in the back of the car. But I remember our oldest asked me, like, "What's wrong?" And I just told her, like, it's Nino's birthday, and this is just his favorite artist. And I remember he was like, "Is this his favorite song?" And I just told her, no, it's not his favorite song, but it's a song that we knew well. And I just cried so much listening to that song. And then what was so crazy was right after that song on Spotify, the damn algorithm got me even worse. Because immediately after, they played this John Lennon song called Hold On. And literally the lyrics are "Hold On, John." And the whole song, it's a very short song, but it's about like things are going to be okay. And just hold on, John. And it's a song more about John and Yoko, you know, kind of trying to figure out probably some New York stress that they were having at the time. But it just found it so meaningful that immediately after that Bob Dylan song, where I'm in like my feels, then the next song is "Hold On, John." It's like everything's going to be okay. And it's just like, was that a message from the spiritual world? You know, I could be cynical and just say, that's the damn algorithm on Spotify. But I also like to think that that was Nino probably extending a hand and just saying, "Hey, I still love you too." You know? And it was just very surreal in that moment. But just little things like that, you know? I didn't share that memory with too many people. I only shared it really with my partner and one of my other best friends, Jeremy, and then now you know, on this recording.
All the other millions of listeners to this podcast.
But yeah, I think even though they were on their way to school and maybe they didn't fully understand, I still found it really nice to be asked in that moment, like, what's going on? Or was this his favorite song? And just the very fact that I got to talk about him for a little few minutes was nice, you know? And I think something that I don't know if she understood at the time when I was crying or not was that they weren't sad tears. They were more just grateful tears of, you know, appreciation of just like, wow, I really had something special when I was younger. And I hope that I'm able to impart some of that type of a relationship with my kids now, you know. And I think that there's things that I do with each of them that makes each of our relationships unique. But It's not to compare, but it's about trying to transcend.
Yeah. What is now the story you tell yourself about grief?
Well, let me rewind the tape and no. The final story, or the new story that I tell myself about grief. I mean, I think, like I said before, in the immediate aftermath, there was just a lot of shock and just the visual that just came to me, because people told me about grief coming in waves. We even learned about that in classes and all that. And let me tell you, that was not just a little wave that hit me in the chest, yo. That was like a tsunami out here. It's just like that just swallowed up the whole world and couldn't see day from night out here. Like, that was just like, I'm done, you know? But nowadays, close to about 8 years after grief, I undoubtedly think about Nino just about every day, and I've learned to really live with grief, but it's become a part of who I am, you know. And whether it's clients asking me about the process, and or just sitting with them, even if we don't explain it, but just being there with them, or whether it's trying to pass things on to my kids, or us now talking here on the podcast, sharing things with my partner also that Nino would have liked. I just think it's just a part of who I am, professionally and personally, and I feel like it was a pivotal moment in my, not a pivotal moment, a pivotal chapter in my life, and I don't think it's over. It's just become part of this new me after grief.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like there's pre-Nino that I don't really remember. That was a small little tyke. There was the years with Nino, and now there's post-Nino.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in that chapter of post-Nino. And it just happens to coincide with being a more mature adult now instead of a young whippersnapper. But yeah, this life is different now. Just life is different after grief.
For the better, and you just got to find what's better. Whether it's just who you become as a result, or how you carry on, or opportunities that follow, or how you've changed.
Yeah, people get stuck in it. Some people succumb to grief, right? That can be pretty bad, pretty intensely painful. But I think it's learning that grief just becomes a part of you. In a sense, absorb it and just let it run through your body, you know, and let it do its thing. And you just kind of learn to live with it. You know, it's coursing through my veins right now. There's no way to really filter it out. There's no real way to stop it or not remember it or quote unquote move on. It's ingrained in me now.
There's no time machine.
Yeah, so for all those out there that are really struggling through grief or are unsure of the type of work they want to do with the grief process, I would say a good place to start is just asking yourself questions and asking other people that have gone through it, or people that are at least open to sharing the experience with you. Just be as open to grief as possibly you can. Trying to control it, contain it, cut it off, those things don't really seem to work. It's more about learning to live with it that really is able to bring more peace.
And if you are a therapist who has never received any grief training, I recommend that you do so. Really take a look at how you handle and sit in that room. Support yourself, support others, support your friends. And yeah, try to do better. This is the Therapy House Podcast, another short episode. And, well, that's it.
Grief is here to stay.
Peace.